What makes an action moral? Does it fulfill some duty, achieve some useful consequence, or express some noble character trait? Let's ask Aristotle. Today, let's talk about Aristotle's views on ethics, particularly his views on virtue. Specifically, let's map out the study of ethics, talk about Aristotle on happiness, define virtue. As we map out philosophy in general, it's divided into three major fields of study: metaphysics, epistemology, and axiology. Let's specifically look at axiology at the bottom and how it's divided into ethics and aesthetics. Aesthetics is the study of value in relation to beauty, and ethics is the study of value in relation to action guiding principles. And this is divided into four subcategories, which are meta-ethics, normative ethics, applied ethics, and descriptive ethics. This is covered in a previous video of mine asking what is philosophy. But specifically, let's get into ethics. Meta-ethics is the most general or abstract or fundamental aspect of ethics. It asks questions like, are values and morals discovered or created? Do good and evil exist? What is their nature? Are morals objective or relative? What creates moral responsibility for an action? Is morality essentially about character, consequences, duty, or something else? Normative ethics takes the answers from meta-ethics and develops them into systems which give normative or guiding principles. It is action guiding. At this level, we start to have general moral principles. And how do we organize those principles? It's based on our meta-ethic. What are the right moral principles or rules? How do these principles relate to each other? What system should we develop to organize these principles? There's three main normative theories. Virtue ethics, which says that character is to be emphasized. Deontology points to duty and rules. Consequentialism points to consequences. So, for example, in meta-ethics, if we say that a moral is defined as that which expresses a certain valuable character trait, then in normative ethics, we will call those virtues, and we will start to articulate perhaps 7 different virtues and explain how those virtues are related to each other. Which virtues are there? How are they related to each other? What's the nature of this system of virtue ethics? How do we relate the moral principles to each other? Next, we have applied ethics, which asks, how should general moral principles be applied in particular situations? For example, politics, bioethics, business ethics, environmental ethics, etc. So this takes the general system and applies it to different aspects of life. Lastly, we have descriptive ethics, which asks, what moral norms does a particular society have? What is the ethical philosophy of a certain philosopher? So descriptive ethics really just tries to observe and describe the moral system of an individual or group of people. Getting into Aristotle, what's Aristotle's view? How does it relate to these different categories? Aristotle has a large emphasis on happiness, and he defines happiness as human flourishing. This is the goal of ethics, to guide our actions to achieve happiness. This comes from the Greek word eudaimonia, which is an important word for you to remember, which means good spirit. You may think eu as in euphoria or utopia, that's good, and daemon means spirit or life. So this is the good spirit or the good life. What is the good life? What is the good life consist in? Good in every aspect of that word. What is the good life, the valuable life, the meaningful life. This concept is shared with Plato and many others in classical philosophy. Flourishing is the filling is filling a capacity completely. It's growing to maximum health. It's exhibiting excellence. So what is the flourishing human life? Well, let's look at the three different capacities or powers present in life. First, we have the vegetative power, which is the power of reproduction, growth, and homeostasis. This is to say, life. All things that are alive have this in common: plants, animals, and humans. Then there's this sensitive power, which is the next one up. Plants do not have this. Only animals and humans have this. This is the power of sensation and emotion. And then there is the intellectual power. Only humans have this. This is the power of reason, and this is why humans are classically defined as rational animal. It is a power that is not shared with animals or plants. What kind of life fully expresses this human nature? It's going to be a life that is led by reason. Reason leads emotion and does not destroy desire like Stoicism. Just to say that a life is led by reason does not mean that it destroys emotion or growth. It just means that it leads it in this proper ordering. Emotion is still essential. Emotion does not lead. That expresses animalistic life, merely responding to stimuli. If you just react emotionally, that is just an animalistic sort of life responding to stimuli. Ethics is living in a properly human way. So we want to investigate what it is to be human, at least in Aristotle's eyes. Let's talk about human teleology. Telos, from the Greek, means the end or proper function of a human. Telos means end or goal or perfection or completion. So what is the completed or the perfect view of a human life? This is also to relate it to Aristotle's final cause. A telos is a final cause. What is the purpose of human life? What kind of life is fully in accordance with the internal nature of what it is to be human? What kind of life fully expresses all of the capacities and abilities of the human life? Human may be understood as a functional kind of concept. For example, a good mailman is one who delivers mail and doesn't go to lunch instead, right? A good mailman will not exhibit these traits. He fails to deliver mail, or he sleeps instead of working, or he delivers to the wrong place. If he does any of these things, then he's not a good mailman. The idea of mailman inherently has action guiding principles within it. A good car, as another example, transports people with little hassle. It does not have engine problems, a flat tire, or is unsafe. If it has these things, then it's not a good car. So we may ask not just what is human, but what is a good human, one that fulfills its function. What's its function? What is the proper function of a human? What is a human? A human's proper function is based on human nature. Humans are defined as rational animals, right? So humans are rational. That's our main defining characteristic. Therefore, the proper function of humanity is to live a rational character. A rational character not only knows virtue, but has virtue. All right, this is Aristotle building upon Plato and taking him further. Someone who is good at being human lives virtuously. Okay, so we're starting to introduce this concept of virtue here. Virtue is a way of living in a rational manner. And one who is good at being human does not react based on irrational emotion, does not have a lack of self-control, and does not lack self-examination. So these are things that are irrational. Being a good human means living rationally. But what is that? Let's define virtue more carefully. What is the rational life? Well, according to Aristotle, it's the life of virtue. Another Greek word to remember is arete, which means moral excellence or virtue. The simple definition of virtue is that it is a habit that makes its possessor good. So virtue is a habit. Let's define the unfamiliar term virtue in reference to a more familiar term, habit. More nuanced definition. This is going to be a very important one for you to write down, and it will continue to make more sense as we progress along in this lecture and others in the future. A more nuanced definition of virtue is that it is a moral habit of the intellectual appetite, or the will, that orders the passions by reason to express human excellence. This is to say that there is a difference between intellectual and moral virtue. In intellectual virtue, if a virtue is considered a habit, a virtue most generically understood is a habit that is excellent for a human to have. All right? So an intellectual virtue is like an intellectual skill. It is like being excellent at math or excellent at doing logic. Okay, but you can imagine an evil genius. You can imagine someone having this kind of intellectual skill without actually being a morally good person. But then we have moral virtue, which these kinds of virtues are habits that order the will to choose according to reason. So this is not just an intellectual skill. This is going to be a habit of choosing. A habit of choosing that which is morally good. For some more detailed explanation of the difference between intellectual virtue and moral virtue, I encourage you to watch my videos on Thomas Aquinas, who develops a lot of Aristotle's ethics and other thought in more careful detail. This does not negate the importance of emotion. So we talk a lot about being led by reason, but it's a false dichotomy in modern culture to say that reason and emotion are opposites. They are not opposites. They are not opposites. Reason and emotion are not opposites. They should not work against each other. You should not have to choose one over the other. They should work together. But if a team is going to work together, it needs to work together in the right way. One of these partners needs to lead the other, but both are essential. Emotion is essential for the moral life. You must not only choose to do good based on reason, but you must love it. You must want to. What are some ways that you might react emotionally instead of in a reasonable way? So far we've defined virtue, but let's now focus specifically on habit, virtue being a type of habit. We might say that habit is a disposition to act in a certain way in certain circumstances. This can apply to different aspects of our life and different aspects of our abilities. For example, football players have physical habits. You see, at first, when a player is trying to learn how to play the game of football, they first need to learn how to throw and how to catch, how to kick, how to run in certain formations, and things like these. When they are first acquiring these habits, they do not have habits. They have to very consciously make decisions each time they throw the ball. It's a very conscious effort, perhaps when they are a small child and just learning how to throw a ball. At first, it takes a lot of effort, but eventually it grows into a habit where they don't even have to think about it. There can also be not only physical habits, but emotional habits, like when a song reminds you of previous emotions, or when you're naturally sympathetic towards starving people. So, for example, these habits may come without your intention, or they may come very consciously. So, for example, you may have a habit of being sympathetic towards starving people because you have a habit of thinking of them as worthy of need and of thinking of fulfilling other people's needs as being morally praiseworthy. So you have a habit of thinking in a certain way so that when the occasion arises, your disposition kicks into gear and you act in a certain way. So a habit is like a second nature. By nature, Aristotle says that we have the capacity for virtue, but we do not naturally have virtue. So we are not born already perfect, but we're born with the ability to grow. When a habit develops, it becomes natural for us to act in a new way. So, for example, take the football player. At first, it's not natural to throw, it's not natural to react in certain ways in the middle of a game, it's not natural for him to make certain plays. But when the player is in the game, he does not have time to think. He just reacts. It's very quick, very fast paced. Reaction happens without thinking because he is acting from habit. And these habits have been created through practice, through the repetition of individual actions over time to the point where the individual actions no longer take that much thought and work, but they come naturally. It is through work that this becomes natural, a sort of new nature, a second nature. Habits are not natural, they are second nature. They are sort of tacked onto our nature and they become automatic for us. For example, the football player. Once we have a habit, we don't have to think about it. The habit is created through reason, specifically, at least for virtues. Virtues are habits that are created through reason. You can have habits that are not created through reason, but these are the opposite of virtue, which we will look at here in a second. So every action is moral if it is ordered by reason, that is, ordered by reason to the good of the person. But that doesn't mean we deliberate for every choice. In fact, it's best if we develop habits to the point where acting rationally is second nature. In other words, the virtuous life of human flourishing is automatic for us. It's natural. It's our normal disposition to act in good ways. We don't always have to think about it. In fact, a lot of times thinking implies a confusion or a lack of knowledge within us. But if we already do know what's right and we're in the habit of thinking in a certain way and acting in a certain way because we're sure of it, then we just react through habit. Now, how do I grow more virtuous? Well, every choice makes the next time we do the same thing easier. Repetition of the same choice cultivates a habit. Moral habits are virtues, character traits that express the virtues. A vice, which is the opposite of a virtue, is a habit that makes its possessor evil or morally blameworthy. So a virtue makes its possessor good, a vice makes its possessor bad, and both are habits. In summary, practice makes perfect. So when you face some kind of moral choice, you're trying to choose between one option and another, trying to pick the right thing to do. When you make the choice, that means the next time you're in the same situation, you are more likely to make the same choice. And then the third time you are in that same situation, you're even more likely to make that same choice. Eventually, you don't even have to think about it anymore. You just react. And that's how habit is formed. That's how virtue is formed. So, also, another tool for growing in virtue is imitating moral exemplars. That is to say, look around you in your life and think about people who you think are better than you are. Oh, my father is a hard worker, or my mother is more patient than I am, or my friend is a lot more caring. Perhaps my sister is a lot more humble, and I want to be more like that. So we identify these different character traits in others, and then we can watch and we can see how they react in different situations, and we can imitate them. We can adapt their behaviors into our own life and apply them to help us imitate these virtues that we see in others. Is all this talk about self-fulfillment and human flourishing selfish and self-centered? So we talk about cultivating virtue as a good thing because it fulfills human nature. It fulfills myself. It is focused on self-fulfillment. But is this selfish? Well, it depends what we mean by self-fulfillment here. A lot of times today, self-fulfillment is applied to a very specific consideration of I should be allowed to do whatever I want and nobody should hinder me. But the kind of self-fulfillment present in this human flourishing that Aristotle talks about is not fulfillment of your particular desires, and it doesn't matter what your desires are, but rather it's a fulfillment of who you are in virtue of your being a human, fulfillment of human nature, which is a rather consistent idea. Within this, we want to distinguish between what's called interested and disinterested. An interested action is where we act for our own interest. And disinterested means when we act without our own interest in mind. So if we are being generous to someone else, for example, are we doing it for the sake of our own interest or not our own interest? Am I trying to feel good about myself, or am I happy because of this act of generosity, or do I not care what the effect is on myself? I just do give to this other person. So different ethical systems have a different view on interest versus disinterest. Just as a foreshadowing, utilitarianism of John Stuart Mill, which we will look at later in this course, and the deontology of Immanuel Kant are both disinterested. They are proponents of disinterest. Aristotle and the later Thomas Aquinas, who we will discuss as well, are advocates of interested ethics. Why is that the case? How can you be interested without being selfish or self-centered? Well, it's important to distinguish between selfish and selfless. Selfish is seeking my desire at another person's expense. And selfless is seeking my desire through seeking another's desire. For example, if I bring my wife flowers because I want to make her happy, and this makes me happy, then I'm interested. If it didn't make me happy, then something is wrong. So take the example sort of fleshed out a little bit more. In one case, I come to my own front door with some flowers, and I walk in and I show my wife the flowers, and I say, "Here, honey, I got you some flowers because it's my duty as your husband to get you flowers every once in a while." And then I go off into the bedroom or something. Well, she's not going to be very happy about me just saying, "I feel like it's my duty." But what would have honored her a lot more, what she would have liked a lot more, is if I would have come in and said, "I got you these flowers I wasn't even intending to. I went to the grocery store, but I just couldn't help myself because I wanted to see the glow on your face when I came in the door and got you these flowers. I wanted to see you happy. Now that makes her happy. Why is there a difference there? It's because I actually am interested in her happiness in the sense that I become happy only when she becomes happy. So this is interest, this is selfless. I am still seeking my desire, but the object of my desire is that she be happy. This is selfless. This is interested ethics. So that everything that I do that is moral is for myself, but it is for myself through serving another. We want to continue to learn how we know whether something is right or wrong. We have one tool, at least, in looking to others to imitate praiseworthy character traits in them, and we know that we're to use our reason, but Aristotle gives us another tool to help us identify what are good and bad actions. First, we identify deficient kinds of character traits. These are vices, okay, habits that make their possessor bad. For example, cowardice is a deficiency. Apathy, laziness, stinginess, false modesty, being indecisive. These are deficiencies. And corresponding to these, we might also have things that are excess in character. All right? These are also vices. These are also bad habits. For example, being reckless, obsessive, greedy, extravagant, or having pride, or being impulsive, right? These correspond to each other. Each row corresponds to the other. So we have a deficiency on one extreme, and on the other extreme, we have an excess. And both of these are bad. What Aristotle proposes is this middle way, this golden mean. This is virtue. These are habits that make their possessor good. So in between cowardice and recklessness, we have courage, which is a proper fear of things and overcoming that fear when appropriate. So we might have someone who is too afraid to, let's say a soldier is too scared to go out on the battlefield. Or you might have someone who lacks any fear and just runs out recklessly onto the battlefield. Okay, both of these, one of them lacks something and one of them is in excess. Right, and so we want this sort of moderation in the middle, this courage. Between apathy and being obsessive, we might have compassion. Between laziness and greed, we might have patience. Between stinginess and extravagance, we might have generosity. Between false modesty and pride, we have humility. Between being indecisive and impulsive, we have self-control. And we can continue this list of virtues on and on for all kinds of different character traits. I don't know that anyone has completely counted all of the possible numbers of virtues, if that's even something that is possible. All right, so the golden mean is a very useful tool in identifying what's a virtue versus a vice of deficiency and a vice of excess. Now let's do the write-up. Aristotle on virtue. First, do you think happiness is the chief end of mankind? What makes humans ultimately happy? What fulfills human nature and gives meaning to life? Although different people make different life choices, is there some consistent guide for what does and does not count as meaningful? What's a flaw that you have? What character trait would you like to improve? What's a hard situation for you? What are some small steps you can take to do better? How would improving in this character trait make your life flourish or give it more meaning?